Just to introduce myself briefly, I'm Mike Buehler. I'm president of San Francisco Heritage. We're San Francisco's leading preservation, nonprofit advocacy and education organization, founded in 1971, coming up on our 50th anniversary next year. And by way of background, about 5 or 6 years ago, we launched a program called our Legacy Bars and Restaurants Initiative, which was really our effort to raise awareness about the significance of legacy bars and restaurants in San Francisco, as we were seeing so many of them at the time close or being evicted. So my presentation today is really just to kind of provide an overview of the origins of our own program that led to the establishment of the San Francisco Legacy Business Registry, an official city administered registry, and share some lessons learned over the past 5 years since the program was originally adopted. Let's see here. I wanted to get back to my first slide. I got to the middle here. I got that. So anyway, I wanted to start with the video of Luca Ravioli because it was one of my favorite legacy businesses in San Francisco that was recently lost. The video that John played was from a little over a year ago, right before Luca announced that it would be closing in April of 2019. And just, I thought it was a good example of kind of a quintessential legacy business in San Francisco. The business started in 94 years ago in 1925, and owned by the same family that entire time. It was a beloved neighborhood establishment where they made homemade ravioli and had, as you saw from the clip, a very loyal group of patrons that supported them, and they're really an icon in the neighborhood. But like many legacy businesses in San Francisco, that really had been closing for different reasons. The incentive to sell their property just became too great as property values in the Mission District, where Luca is located, just skyrocketed. And in this case, Michael Fino, the family member who had worked at Luca since 1966. He started there when he was 11 years old. He's pictured in the center here. They own 3 properties at the corner of Valencia and 22nd Street in the Mission. And he was in his late 60s at the time and made the decision for his family that it would be best to close the business and sell the properties rather than continue. And that's exactly what he did last year, and sold 3 properties in a parking lot for over $10 million. So sadly, we lost Luca Ravioli, but it still is really representative of the kind of special qualities that define legacy businesses anywhere. So going back in time to 2012, 2013, when San Francisco Heritage was really deciding how we respond to the increasing rapid closure of the city's legacy businesses. It almost seems surreal under the current circumstances, the current state of the world. But at that time in San Francisco, as you can see from this headline from John King, there were unprecedented development pressures in San Francisco that not only threatened the physical historic fabric of our neighborhoods, but also were resulting in widespread evictions of beloved neighborhood legacy businesses that had been stalwarts in their communities and had contributed to their communities for generations. And the city really found itself with no tools to kind of stem the tide. There was a city study in 2014 that found over 4,000 small businesses closing in San Francisco due to development pressure, skyrocketing rents, and a number of other factors. As John King wrote in this story, these are unsettling times in San Francisco where the winds of change have reached hurricane force. It's cultural upheaval more than a physical one, triggered by money and demographics. Anything that's not protected as a landmark is a potential victim of the desire to ride the prosperous wave. So I thought I'd start by just profiling a few other examples of businesses that closed in this time period that is really kind of unfathomable that, that some of these places would close their doors. The first is Sam Wo, which opened right in the wake of the 1906 earthquake in 1907 and had existed for over a century. It soon became a staple of Chinatown neighborhood and then the larger San Francisco community. It became the quintessential San Francisco place, everybody's favorite hole-in-the-wall restaurant, and was infamous as home to Edsel Ford Fung, quote, the world's worst, most insulting waiter. And he's pictured here on the left in 1982 with some of his adoring, abused patrons. Next, Marcus Bookstore and in the Fillmore, the oldest African-American bookstore in the country, which the Fillmore, of course, was once the heart of the African-American community in San Francisco. Marcus Books was evicted in 2014 after the owners sold the building. The community and then supervisor, now mayor, Leonard Breed, rallied to landmark the building, but that did not prevent its displacement. And then finally, and this business is actually perhaps the biggest catalyst for Heritage's work in this area, and that's the loss of the Gold Dust Lounge, which is located in Union Square, and the owners of the building in which it is located announced that they would not be renewing the lease so that a chain store, the Limited, could move into the space that they had occupied, well, a bar had occupied this space since 1918. And in this case, this was a huge public grassroots effort to save the Gold Dust Lounge, including multiple front page stories in the San Francisco Chronicle. And we, as the city's preservation organization, had really no tools to help save the Gold Dust Lounge. And it really dawned on us at the time that we need to go beyond traditional landmarking to try to find ways to protect and sustain the city's intangible cultural heritage assets, and which are much broader than just businesses and nonprofits, but legacy businesses are probably the easiest to understand example of intangible cultural heritage assets. There was an effort, again, to landmark the Gold Dust Lounge, and for all the reasons we know as preservationists, landmarking is not an effective safeguard against eviction because it protects only the physical fabric of the space. So kind of in the wake of the loss of the Gold Dust Lounge, which I should note did reopen in Fisherman's Wharf a few years later, but a totally different context. But in the wake of that effort, we found ourselves kind of doing some soul searching in terms of what we could do to respond to these increasing threats. Now, the first question we had to address as an organization is, why should a historic preservation organization founded in the early 70s and as an architecturally focused organization, why should we care about saving old businesses? Our focus for the first 4 decades of our existence had really been on historic architecture, and many of our long-term members up until this day really didn't understand Heritage focusing on the plight of businesses in San Francisco. As an example, at this same time, we decided to shorten our name from San Francisco Architectural Heritage to just San Francisco Heritage. And you've seen quite a significant amount of blowback from our long-term members, just decrying the loss of architectural in our name. And our intent in doing that was to be able to, for this very purpose, to broaden our focus to encompass not just historic buildings, but to encompass the broad range of historic resources that define our communities, which even more beloved than buildings, I would argue, are the legacy businesses that are community anchors in individual neighborhoods throughout the city. So as a first step down this path, staff of Heritage at the time, which included Desiree Smith and Laura Dominguez, who really were instrumental in our effort to branch out into intangible cultural heritage assets. We authored a policy paper, and this is the cover of the policy paper, Sustaining San Francisco's Living History. And as I referenced earlier, the paper just noted the obvious, that there are many tools to protect physical buildings, but preservation methods, at least in this country, had not evolved to meet the emerging goals within the broader preservation movement, which at that time and up until this day have really increasingly focused on people-focused preservation and how historic resources relate to the daily lives and enrich the daily lives of people. And for all the reasons I've discussed so far, our existing tools were really inadequate to meet those goals. So in terms of the paper itself, it's about a 50-page policy paper, and it's available on our website. I'll include the link actually is there listed on the bottom, I'm sorry. It profiled a number of case studies internationally of what other global cities have been doing to protect legacy businesses in their communities. And the paper included examples from Buenos Aires, London, Barcelona, and other cities, including a number of domestic examples. But the most influential examples included the Bares Notables program from Buenos Aires, which some of you may be aware is a designation program for bars, cafes, pool halls, and other similar establishments where those businesses receive marketing assistance from the city for tourism, but also are eligible for grants for minor capital improvement projects. That was a very influential example. And then there are other examples, including from London, a program where a pub program that enabled patrons of pubs which were increasingly threatened and are increasingly threatened, which would enable them to form a co-op essentially and purchase those businesses to ensure their survival. These were all, we kind of picked and choose from these various examples to kind of form recommendations for our own program involving intangible heritage in San Francisco. And the paper, as stated here, included 6 strategies that go well beyond just a registry for intangible heritage assets, but also includes a range of other strategies to sustain living heritage in San Francisco. The one that really resonated the most, though, was our work involving legacy bars and restaurants. And about the same time as the policy paper came out, actually preceding the policy paper, Heritage had launched a program called Legacy Bars and Restaurants. And this program really had modest aims to begin with. It was primarily conceived as an education program, a public awareness campaign. You know, in San Francisco, like other major cities, you read about the newest bar and restaurant in your community in the paper every weekend in the food section, but you never heard about the kind of stalwarts in the community that had been there for generations. And we, as so many of them had been facing displacement and eviction, we thought it was time to really focus on the contributions of these institutions in the neighborhood. So our initiative, the Legacy Bars and Restaurants Initiative, included several components. We started by our initial list of 25 bars and restaurants that would be included in the program. And that was a great experiment because it was actually quite controversial because, of course, people have strong opinions about what bars and restaurants should receive this kind of heightened level of recognition. So it stirred a lot of public debate on social media and elsewhere in terms of what types of which businesses specifically are most emblematic of San Francisco. And that was really encouraging to us. So for the second round of 25 bars and restaurants that we added to our list, we included a public voting campaign. And we worked with a PR firm to kind of design that process. It included traditional media, such as this. This was a front page story in the San Francisco Chronicle at the time. And I love this quote from Carl Nolte, who noted how surprising it was that kind of a stodgy old preservation organization was branching out into dive bars and establishments and recognizing those as an important part of the city's cultural legacy. So, but our public voting campaign included traditional media and was heavily reliant on social media where people could vote for their neighborhood bar or restaurant. And based on those public results, and we had thousands of votes, not overwhelming, but pretty good for our social media reach at the time. And based on that, we named our next round of 25. And over the next few years, we had 2 more rounds of 25 until we got to 100 bars and restaurants, which still was not wholly inclusive. There were many that were left off the list, but we decided that would be a good time to pause and start promoting the bars and restaurants on our list in other ways. So one of the projects that we completed, we had compiled a list of 100 bars and restaurants, is this paper fold-out map of the first 100 bars and restaurants organized by neighborhood. And this was a deliberately kind of analog project where rather than, although we also had an online map, we really wanted to have something that people could feel and touch and kind of have crumpled in their back pocket as they explored the city. And this item was really popular in raising awareness for the program. We also worked with our graphic designer, Chen Design Associates, to kind of design a logo for the program and do the design work on the map and other collateral for the program. Other examples of what we did to promote bars and restaurants on our list of 100 included a decal program. I don't know if you can make it out there. The image on the left there is in the window Wisberger district, founded in 1965. You can see their legacy bars and restaurants decal on the window. Happy to just stumble upon that one day to see them using our window decal. And then subsequent to that, we partnered with Heyday Books, a nonprofit publisher based in Berkeley, on a book entitled High Spirits, which profiled 26 legacy bars on our list, included new photography of these establishments, and was written by J.K. Deneen, a columnist, a reporter for the San Francisco Chronicle, who did a lot of research, on-site research for the book project. And it really turned out wonderfully and was a great way to kind of promote the Legacy Bars and Restaurants program beyond our base. It's a popular book and has had a few different print runs. And actually now we're considering doing a second edition of the book to reflect how some of these businesses are faring with the current pandemic. So this was around end of 2014 when we were approached by then Supervisor David Campo. We'd been made aware of our Legacy Bars and Restaurants initiative, our modest public education campaign, and proposed to make it an official City of San Francisco Legacy Business Registry. And we were obviously incredibly enthusiastic about that prospect. There were no legacy business programs in this country at the time. And we worked closely with his staff, the Office of Small Business, and other community stakeholders to craft legislation to create the first legacy business registry in the country. And one kind of guiding premise of this alternative registry, unlike the traditional historic designation programs for buildings, we really felt it was important that the legacy business registry have a low bar to entry, so it could reflect a truly diverse array of businesses and nonprofits in San Francisco, and that it also be incentive-based rather than regulatory. As many of us know, there is oftentimes a knee-jerk negative reaction to historic designation for fear that it will impose restrictions on property owners' rights in some way. And we felt it was important that this legislation be incentive-based and to make business owners, as well as their landlords, open to the idea of being included in the registry and supportive and see it as a badge of honor, something that they would actively pursue. So with this legislation, which largely adopted Heritage's criteria for defining legacy businesses, the city criteria defined the businesses as, and nonprofits as follows. They must have been in continuous operation for 30 years or more, must contribute to the history of the neighborhood or community, and they must demonstrate that. And then lastly, the owner of the business commit to maintaining the physical features or traditions that define the business, including craft, culinary, or art forms, or in other words, the intangible aspects of the business. So that legislation, incidentally, was passed without any resistance at all, unanimously passed at the Board of Supervisors in, I think, May of 2015, and specific benefits at the time. So as a result, there were a handful of nominations that came through, but there wasn't an avalanche of interest in among businesses in applying for the registry. That all changed in fall of 2015 when Heritage worked with Supervisor Campos, as well as other stakeholders such as the National Trust for Historic Preservation and others, to put together a shoestring campaign to pass Prop J, which was a ballot measure that provides a funding stream to provide annual grants to legacy businesses and nonprofits on the registry. So that campaign took place throughout late summer and fall of 2015. And the argument at the time was that this is really an equity issue. In San Francisco in 2014, 2015, you'd read about how the city was providing special tax incentives and other incentives to attract large tech employers to the city. And those employers, however you might feel about them, were having real impacts on rents in San Francisco, and were having indirect effects on the city and the quality of life as a whole. So the argument for the ballot measure was to kind of provide a comparable level of support, or even not even comparable level, but some kind of support to help the legacy businesses that had survived and contributed to their communities for generations. So this is what Prop J did. It provided funding for two separate grant programs for legacy businesses. The first is for annual grants to the businesses themselves, equal to $500 per full-time employee, up to a maximum of 100 employees. So any given legacy business could qualify for an annual grant of up to $50,000 a year if they could demonstrate they had 100. It all depended on the number of full-time employees that they could document. In addition, because one of the key challenges facing legacy businesses in San Francisco is that they did not own their building and they could not get their leases renewed. So the Prop J included a rent stabilization grant program where landlords actually are eligible to receive annual grant from the city equal to $4.50 per square foot up to 5,000 square feet. That means that in exchange for entering into a 10-year lease with their legacy business tenant, the landlord could qualify for an annual grant of up to $22,500 a year. So that was the basis of Prop J and what it sought to accomplish. And it was a shoestring campaign, as I mentioned. There were not ads on TV or anything like that. San Francisco Chronicle, their editorial board recommended a no vote on Prop J over concerns about the kind of the funding impact it might have if hundreds of legacy businesses were listed. And there was some press coverage, including this article by J.K. Denis, the author of High Spirits. And we really didn't know how it was going to go until Election Day in November. And the Prop J hooray passed by 57% of voters. And we were off to the races. From that point forward, the legacy business program in San Francisco was really became hugely popular among businesses and nonprofits, and led to dozens and dozens of nominations being submitted in the wake of Prop J being passed. So I'll just provide a quick overview of the nomination process that San Francisco follows. There are variations on this in other cities. But in San Francisco, the business or nonprofit must be first nominated by their local supervisor or the mayor to be considered for listing in the legacy business registry. The application form is a set list of questions. It's a short form, again, kind of getting back to my point earlier about how it was intended to be a low bar to entry. So the application form must be, or the narrative for the application must be 4 pages or less. It's not comparable to a National Register nomination, for example. It's much more streamlined. And that narrative in the application must demonstrate how that business has contributed to their community over the past 30 plus years. And then it must also identify the physical features and the intangible features that define that business. And once that narrative is submitted, it's processed, it's submitted to our Office of Small Business, and then is reviewed by 2 commissions, our Historic Preservation Commission, which is really responsible for reviewing the list of physical and intangible features and kind of determining what the owner will be protecting going forward if and when their business is listed in the Legacy Business Registry. And then the comments from the HPC are forwarded to the Small Business Commission, which makes the final determination. And I'll just say, in terms of our Historic Preservation Commission, they absolutely love the Legacy Business Registry because if you go to a hearing where there is a batch of nominations to be submitted, it's a love fest. You have these proud business owners, family-owned businesses, testifying about how much San Francisco matters to them and how important it is for their business to remain based in San Francisco. And then the owners are often followed by a stream of loyal patrons. And it's just kind of the epitome of community. And our historic preservation commissioners just love it. And it's been a really positive new component to the city's historic preservation program. And for more information on the Legacy Business Registry program in San Francisco, check that link. That's the small business, the Office of Small Businesses link to their Legacy Business program. So I thought I'd share just a few examples of what types of features are protected, what types of traditions are protected when a business is added to the Legacy Business Registry. Excuse me. So this is Sam's Grill. This is a tremendously historic, one of the oldest restaurants in the country, and opened in 1867, is undoubtedly eligible for the Legacy Business Registry. And this was one of the first businesses that San Francisco Heritage nominated to the Legacy Business Registry. That's an important part of our advocacy mission over the past 5 years, is that we work with businesses to prepare nominations and collect photos and family photos and things like that and compiling the nomination. These are not people who are trained in preservation and the nomenclature of what we do. And so that's a service that we provide. But some of the examples, some of the physical and intangible features called out in the narrative for Sam's Grill include its brightly lit main room and private booths, its professional, formally attired wait staff, the small neon sign you can see there, interior bar, marine plank siding, its location in the heart of the financial district, and then things such as menu items. It's lobster thermidor or sand dabs, which have been on the menu for over a century. So there's some great photos from Sam's. This is one of the waiters at Sam's in next to the private booths that are among the physical features that define Sam's. And all the wait staff wears the tuxedo attire every day. That's one of the tangible features that is called out in the nomination. Also, the menu, which is printed daily. I mentioned some of the classic offerings, such as sand dabs, that have made Sam's famous. And so those items are protected as part of the Legacy Business Registry nomination. And the owner has agreed to offer those menu items, to continue those traditions, and to protect the physical features that define Sam's as an institution. So what has, 5 years on, what has the impact been of San Francisco's Legacy Business Registry program? And there are a number of lessons learned, some positive, some unexpected, some growing pains, frankly, that need to be grappled with going forward. So in terms of the impacts, this is very straightforward. The Legacy Business Registry here in San Francisco documents places and businesses that would not otherwise be documented. Businesses like Casa Sanchez, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with their products. They also operated a taqueria here in San Francisco. But these are places that would not, potentially not be eligible for traditional landmark designation. So there are few opportunities to actually document their story. Legacy Business Registry provides a really valuable kind of database of defining San Francisco businesses, and Casa Sanchez being one of those, which is a wonderful story that dates back almost 100 years. Also, important aspect to the official San Francisco Legacy Business Registry compared to Heritage's Legacy Bars and Restaurants program is that it goes well beyond bars and restaurants. The diversity of businesses and nonprofits recognized in the registry is really amazing. And includes everything from bookstores to hotels to karate studio to nonprofits, including San Francisco Heritage. We are eligible for the registry and we nominated ourselves. And so we now have over 230 businesses and nonprofits listed on the registry in every supervisorial district throughout the city. So much more so than our list of landmark properties. The Legacy Business Registry is truly representative of the people of San Francisco. Few examples of different reasons why business owners are motivated to seek listing in the registry. This is Maria Davis, owner of St. Mary's Pub. At the time they applied for the Legacy Business Registry, their building was on the market, and they were motivated to apply for the Legacy Business Registry in order to qualify for the rent stabilization grants and in order to partner with, to kind of promote themselves and make any prospective buyers aware of their important role of the community, but also enabling them to provide some kind of incentive to potential owners, potential purchasers of the property, to give them an incentive to renew their lease. Also, one of the kind of unexpected benefits of the Legacy Business Registry, as I mentioned, it was conceived wholly as an incentive-based program with the annual grants, but Legacy Business Status also provides, indirectly provides a level of protection. This is a project involving a development project adjacent to Zeitgeist, which is an outdoor beer garden in San Francisco on the Legacy Business Registry. And because of the Legacy Business Status, the Planning Commission shaved 5 feet off of the height of the proposed development in order to minimize any potential shadows cast on the outdoor beer garden. So even though that's not a direct regulatory protection, the Legacy Business Registry motivated the Planning Commission to modify plans in order to enable them to continue. And obviously, you can't have an outdoor beer garden if it's cast in shadows, especially in San Francisco all the time. And I should mention, actually, with this Zeitgeist example, getting back to one of the requirements of being listed in the Legacy Business Registry, because each business must be, in effect, sponsored by their local supervisor or the mayor, there's kind of built-in political support for their continued existence. So in the case of Zeitgeist, they had a relationship with their supervisor who would go to bat for them to address their concerns in the proposed development. And that, I think, is really a critical factor for these businesses, because the amount of funding that is available to them through the annual grants is relatively modest. Political support is often much more important to ensuring their survival in San Francisco. And then Sam Woe, one of the best success stories, reopened in 2015 after being closed for 3 years. Supervisor Aaron Peskin introduced special legislation to put them on the Legacy Business Registry, and they reopened in a new location with a newly restored neon sign in 2015. And this is another important aspect of the Legacy Business Registry, to compare it to traditional landmark programs. The designation goes with the business. So if they're forced to relocate, as many today have moved several times throughout their history, they remain on the Legacy Business Registry. But oftentimes they can take some of their defining physical features with them, such as a neon sign, such as a bar back, or whatever it might be. So oftentimes those physical features that are protected are movable and go with the business to their new location. So just a few statistics here. from the most recent annual report from the program. This year's annual report has been delayed, but just to give you an idea of how many grants are awarded each year under the program, these numbers have gone up in the 2 years since these figures were published. But 72 business assistance grants were awarded 2017, 2018. Average grant was just under $9,000. San Francisco Heritage, our grant, because we have only 9 staff, is less than $3,000. But for businesses that have more employees, it's a meaningful level of support. The rent stabilization grants, about $170,000 was distributed in 2017, 2018 to 14 different landlords. Since these statistics were released, the Office of Small Business has had to reduce the amount awarded to businesses for the business assistance grant because of the popularity of the program. There are now over 230 businesses. There's simply not enough money to provide $500 per full-time employee. The Office of Small Businesses in the last 2 years has increasingly focused more of its attention on the rent stabilization grants because they, and we agree with this, have concluded that the rent stabilization grants are more effective in securing legacy businesses over the long term. In addition to the grants, the Office of Small Business, as well as Heritage, provides technical assistance to many of the businesses on the registry and marketing assistance. So in conjunction with the marketing efforts, the city, a little bit late, but late is better than never, certainly, completed a new logo for the program, which you can see here on this slide, as well as a range of different collateral materials so that businesses can promote themselves as legacy businesses. And there will be more activity, more focus on that in years to come. And again, it's similar, what the city is doing is similar to what SF Heritage was trying to do when we launched our Legacy Bars and Restaurants initiative, and that's provide these businesses with the tools to kind of promote their longevity in the community and their significance to the community, not just to a local audience, but also to tourists. So, and then since San Francisco adopted its program, a handful of other cities have either studied or enacted their own programs, led by San Antonio in 2018. Seattle commissioned a study and I believe has now launched a more modest legacy business program last year. And then our counterpart in LA, the LA Conservancy, launched their Legacy Business Initiative in 2019, which is comparable to our Legacy Bars and Restaurants program in that they've used their own constituency to promote legacy businesses, and have actually they've really built around and have introduced a number of kind of creative ways to promote businesses, especially during the pandemic. So just have a few slides regarding COVID-19 and the current plight facing legacy businesses. Of course, not just in San Francisco, but all over the country. This is an excerpt from our upcoming newsletter. And as stated here, we really, given the severity of the threats facing the city's legacy businesses, we really view our advocacy for the city's legacy businesses and the Legacy Business Registry program as our paramount preservation issue of this time. And SF Heritage is doing a number of things to support legacy businesses during the shutdown, led by our communications and advocacy staff, Woody LaBounty and Carrie Young. We have regularly profiled dozens and dozens of legacy businesses during the last 3.5 months. And whenever possible, we have promoted their own crowdfunding efforts to try to raise funding needed to support their staff during this shutdown period. And in addition to that, we have organized a coalition of legacy businesses and nonprofits to advocate for maintaining and increasing funding for the city's legacy business registry program going forward. And we're very encouraged by the number of businesses that have signed up for that coalition, over 150 to date. And we're likewise encouraged by the response we've received from members of our Board of Supervisors to our efforts to maintain and increase funding for the program. As some of you may know, San Francisco is, like all cities, is facing a major budget deficit. The remainder of this year and going into next year, $1.7 billion projected budget and deficit, and it could be significantly worse than that. So this is not a great time to be asking for additional funds for anything. But our argument simply is that the Legacy Business Registry is effectively a pre-vetted list of significant businesses that have contributed to San Francisco for decades. And inevitably, the amount of city resources available to support small businesses is limited. And the city should take advantage of this vetted list of the city's most significant small businesses in prioritizing how it allocates limited resources. Some of the grant programs for small businesses in San Francisco are a lottery-based distribution system, and we think that there are better ways to go about doing that, especially when you have this group of 230 plus businesses that have gone through this rigorous process, and they're distributed throughout the city, and they're representative of the city. Our argument is simply that they should receive priority going forward. There are some glimmers of hope in these desperate times. One example, of course, internationally iconic legacy business in San Francisco is City Lights. But at the outset of the shutdown, they announced that they may very well need to close. That led to a GoFundMe campaign, which raised over $500,000, including an astonishing $365,000 in one of its first days. So City Lights just a few weeks ago reopened after the community stepped forward to ensure its survival. And it's been really heartening to see in places much more modest than City Lights, and businesses much more modest than City Lights, how their patrons, how their surrounding community has stepped up with financial contributions to ensure their survival. These places are the places that kind of define the communities in which people live, and they can't even fathom seeing them not return. So much of our assistance has been focused on profiling businesses with crowdfunding campaigns and just raising awareness that they are in need of help. And there's been great success in most of the campaigns that have been sponsored in meeting their goals. And just in preparing for today's presentation, I was really gratified to see that other cities are embracing the legacy business kind of framework to address the challenges posed by COVID-19. This is an article about the city of West Hollywood that just a few weeks ago, Councilwoman there, Lauren Meister, introduced an item to direct city staff to come back with recommendations about creating their own legacy business program in West Hollywood. I'm sure some of you on this presentation might be more familiar with this effort, but I really thought that the Councilwoman's quote there at the bottom was really apt. You know, the city wants to find ways to support our legacy businesses because we know that it is their uniqueness that helps make West Hollywood, West Hollywood. In fact, that's the exact same argument that we made when advocating for passage of Prop J back in 2015. These are the businesses that make San Francisco, San Francisco. And I couldn't agree more. Just kind of closing up here, wanted to point out a few valuable resources for further reading if you're interested in perhaps establishing a legacy business registry program in your own community. The Office of Small Business here in San Francisco has a series of annual reports for the program that go into a great level of detail on the numbers of businesses that are on the registry, how the funding has been allocated, and I would encourage any of you interested in getting more detail on how our program works to review those annual reports. They're really a wealth of information in there. And then I just became aware of this paper by Erin Swice recently. She interviewed me last year for her graduate paper at U of O on legacy businesses, and she contacted me and shared the results of her paper, which is actually a really unparalleled resource for comparing and contrasting the fledgling legacy business programs in this country. She includes case studies from San Francisco, of course, but as well as San Antonio, Seattle, and the LA Conservancy's Legacy Business Initiative. One thing that I found very persuasive in her paper is how legacy business programs are an important new innovation for the field of preservation in terms of addressing and advancing social equity. And that has certainly been our experience in San Francisco. As I've mentioned, the Legacy Business Registry designated businesses are much more representative of the city than, for example, our historic buildings or historic districts. And the incentives provided through the programs help ensure intergenerational equity, transfer of skills and knowledge. And I think that's a really important overlay, especially in these times, to be aware of as your own city might be considering the legacy business program. And then finally, the paper that started it all for San Francisco Heritage, our Sustaining San Francisco's Living History policy paper. It's getting old now, but the case studies, I think, are still pertinent and valuable. And it also helps make the case, at least it did to my own board and our own supporters, as to why it's important for a preservation organization to venture out and seek to protect and sustain intangible heritage assets in the city. So I always consider this paper as our own little manifesto justifying why it's important for a preservation organization to broaden its mission in this way. So I would highly recommend those, and I'm told by John and Chris that my PowerPoint will be made available. If anybody can't write down these links fast enough, that information will be made available subsequent to this. And then finally, I just wanted to plug an upcoming program that SF Heritage will be sponsoring in a couple of weeks. That's the first installment of our annual lecture series. And it will focus on women-owned legacy businesses in San Francisco. And we're happy to be partnering again with Denise Clifton. She's the author of Tables from the Rubble. One of the early influences on San Francisco Heritage in kind of conceiving our Legacy Bars and Restaurants program. Denise has been a wonderful partner over the past 5 or 6 years, and we're working with her again to present this session, including representatives Julie Ho from Sam Woe and Marilisa Simmons-Cook from Speck Sadler, just a few blocks away from Sam Woe. So that program is free, and you can register on our website. And I think it will be a really engaging program demonstrating how legacy businesses have been resilient in the past, whether it be emerging from the 1906 earthquake, and how they're being resilient and resourceful now to weather the incredible challenges, unprecedented challenges they face today. So with that, I'll hand it back to Chris and John, and I think we'll be taking some questions. And now I seem I'm over time though, so I don't know how much time you have for questions. So
That's okay. That's okay, Mike. We've told everybody that we'll extend the time by about 10 minutes so you can answer some questions.
Okay, thank you. Sorry about that. I lost track.
Oh no, that's okay. It was such great information. I know John was going to field the first one. What do you have, John?
So many great questions. So I'll just start with a question from Donna. She was asking if you could maybe elaborate on the role that San Francisco's Japantown played in sparking the conversation about protecting intangible neighborhood heritage and serving as a model for community-based heritage planning.
Thank you for that question, and thank you for reminding me of the really important role that Japantown played in our early efforts. And actually, Japantown, we have a section in our policy paper, Sustaining San Francisco's Living History, on efforts to document the intangible heritage of Japantown, which was really invented out of whole cloth during that effort. The planning department worked very closely with the community over, I think, more than a 10-year period to develop. One example of that is in Japantown, they used a social heritage inventory form to document longstanding businesses in the community. And we actually include an example of that form in our policy paper. And that was a really critical milestone in inspiring our efforts to launch the Legacy Bars and Restaurants program and kind of embrace intangible heritage as something legitimate for us to do. And Japantown is also a recognized cultural district in San Francisco, one of the very first that includes both physical landmarks and intangible qualities, such as festivals and businesses and things like that. So really instrumental. John, I can't hear you. You're muted.
John, you're still muted.
Sorry, I was trying to be kind here because I was about to sneeze. But there was another question about the economic impact of San Francisco legacy businesses to the city. Have you ever calculated it? I noticed you posted a link to the small business report, but were there any interesting facts or figures drawn from that?
So in the then Supervisor Campos, when he was crafting the legislation to create the Legacy Business Registry, he directed the city to commission a study of the impact of small businesses and particularly legacy businesses on the city's economy, as well as the threats that they face. And if I'm correct, that is the most kind of complete example trying to gauge the financial or the economic impact of legacy businesses. But more work, frankly, needs to be done in that effort. And I would like that to be a focus going forward to certainly strengthen our arguments, because right now it's beyond, undoubtedly there's an economic argument, but there's also a sentimental, nostalgic factor and a community-based impact that all these places have to kind of maintaining the cohesiveness of individual San Francisco neighborhoods.
Great. So Mike, you had said in your PowerPoint that there were 72 grants for 2017, 2018, about 625,000. Do you expect that same amount to be granted over the next couple of years in consideration of what is going on?
So this is yes, I do, absolutely. There is not enough funding right now to support the grant programs for the 230 plus legacy businesses. And that's what really has kind of led us to do this focused advocacy effort to increase funding. The amount of funding for the Legacy Business Registry program in San Francisco has remained flat since its inception. A little bit over $1 million is allocated in its first year, which was plenty of money at that time. Now that we have over 230 businesses and nonprofits, it's not nearly enough to support the grant program. So the all available funding will be exhausted. Actually, I think the whole structure of the grant program, how they calculate grants, will need to be rethought in order to ensure the sustainability of the program going forward. And in fairness, that was one of the criticisms when the ballot measure was on the ballot, that if this became a really popular program, it would exponentially become more expensive. But when you think about it, in a multi-billion-dollar city budget is really just budget dust, and is not much of a financial commitment. So with a relatively small increased investment by the city, the initial goals of the program can be met.
So there was a question about from John about when a legacy business owner changes. So what do you do? Are there any tools in this program that allow stakeholders to attract a sensitive new operator or owner to the legacy business?
Well, absolutely. I mean, that's really the purpose of the legacy business designation. When a new owner is considering purchasing one of these businesses, they have it documented in relatively short form in front of them, all of the features that, in order to qualify for these financial incentives from the city, that they must commit to continuing as owner. And by and large, as these businesses have changed hands, that has not been an issue. They've carried on the traditions, the essential qualities of those businesses. But it's helpful because this is kind of the value of historical documentation. Any prospective owner, it's clear right there in black and white, right there in print, kind of what defines the special qualities of that business. So I think that's a very valuable tool in itself.
Mike, I had a separate question for you. You had said that when you took architecture out of the name, that you got some blowback. How did you find that it was because people didn't want to address the intangible heritage component that you're talking about, especially with these legacy businesses? I mean, what was the problem in the acceptance of it?
I would say it was kind of the reverse of that. They were concerned that the architectural focus of our work would be diluted as a result of kind of branching out to include legacy businesses. And I would argue that we've been able to carry out both aspects of our mission very effectively. And in fact, by branching out into legacy businesses, it has only expanded our constituency and the importance of our voice at City Hall, and has really gone a great way to advancing that goal of making preservation more people focused, and has led to a number of wonderful partnerships just for us as a nonprofit organization. We work with legacy businesses all the time. They donate to our silent auction gala and do all sorts of other things. Our holiday open house last year featured all foods donated by legacy businesses, including special fortune cookies that had preservation fortunes in them from the legacy business fortune cookie maker in Chinatown. So these are kind of unexpected kind of dividends of branching out into this area. So I think it's been all positive.
Okay, so we have 1 minute coming up for any final questions. And while I'm looking at these, there was one question from Stephen who's asking where the, I guess you sort of answered this, but maybe just to reiterate where the funding comes from.
So the funding comes from the general fund in San Francisco, and the Prop J voters kind of required that the funding be allocated by the city to support the program. And I would say that maybe that's not perhaps the best way to go. I think a more certain funding source, one that can grow with the program as it grows, would have been a better way to conceive it. But it does currently come out of the general fund, and it's the budget is determined at the discretion of the mayor and the board of supervisors. So that is an ongoing challenge, and it's going to be a challenge going forward as the program continues to grow.
So Mike, we just have time for a couple more. One question, a quick one. Are legacy businesses closing more during the COVID period, and how many and what percentage? Do you have any kind of statistics yet on that? I don't have any statistics I can share here today. Most of the examples are anecdotal, and I'm kind of racking my brain to think of
legacy businesses that have closed permanently during the pandemic, and none are coming to mind. I have no doubt that some will not survive, though, this extended closure, especially as, you know, extends longer than even what we may have anticipated. So I don't have those statistics, unfortunately, but I expect that's something we will be compiling.
Okay, and then one question that came up earlier, could you just explain real quick your thinking about limiting the initial list to 25 businesses, and were your criteria different from the city's criteria?
Well, you know, we were kind of making it up as we were going along when we first launched our Legacy Bars and Restaurants program. And we felt that we'd come up with a very solid list of 25 to start out with. There's no magic to it. And it was a great experiment to see what type of reaction we would get. And I loved the fact that this was such a kind of contentious issue. And it really kind of pointed to the potential of the program going forward. There's so much kind of public interest in this. And we found that that was a manageable number to start with, a manageable number where we could do outreach to the businesses that were listed, and we just kind of took it in chunks of 25 going forward. And for each round of 25, we held a community event where we invited the businesses to attend. It was a big celebration. And you know, those businesses would promote their designation on their own social media platforms. And it just wasn't overwhelming. It was kind of a manageable and a bite-sized chunk of businesses. We could have gone to 300, you know, ultimately, but we felt like 100 was a nice place to stop, and we can add businesses ad hoc if we want to. But really, frankly, once the city started their own legacy business program with our help, our focus really shifted almost wholly into kind of ensuring the success of the city administrative program. So our Legacy Bars and Restaurants program is not really very active at present.
Okay, I think we should just start wrapping it up. John's been posting some links inside the chat box. And Mike, we wanted to thank you so much for coming on and share one of our webinars and sharing all this very important information with the group. Where can people get in touch with you or find out more information?
Please feel free to email me. My email is mbuehler@sfheritage.org. And there's more information on our website about our own legacy business advocacy. And I'll put in a final plug here. We just completed a video of one of the legacy businesses we nominated, Bimbo's 365 Club in North Beach. And you can click on our banner on our website and watch that 4-minute video. It's really spectacular and is all the reason you need to see the value of recognizing these businesses.
So that was on, John, you there? You want to wrap it up? You're still on mute, John.
We lost you for a second there, Mike, I think, or I don't know if that was just me, but I'm pasting the link that you mentioned to Bimbo's 365 in the chat box. And I'm also including a link at the bottom to our evaluation page. So please let us know how we did today. We look forward to hearing what other programs you want to see from us. And thank you for your time today. Chris and I have another call to make it, so we have to leave now, I'm sure.
But I wanted to tell everybody to have a nice holiday weekend with your families, and we will be continuing with our webinars after the holiday is over. So thanks, everyone. Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, you guys.
Bye.